I used to think that exaggeration is an alankar given to poets. However, I am delighted to see that Atiranjana is also an alankar which some scientists can also use. So Dr. Dadhij has just now used this in good measure, and as I go by in my talk, you'll realize that how poorly I measure up to what he has said about me. As has been said, primarily, and luckily, because of that, even now, I'm a poet. I have been a bureaucrat for my livelihood, and it was during that period that I developed what seems to be now an irrepressible love of the arts. Since I was a bureaucrat and a poet and a lover of arts, so lovers, poets and bureaucrats create a nice chaotic structure. I am not an academician, so I would not perhaps be giving you a very proper lecture. What I'm going to tell you, what I think is the defense. I mean, in a manner of speaking, I'm going to speak in defense of my love. Why do I love arts? And try to explore with you the notion that why in such turbulent and violent times as ours, there is a place perhaps, or there is a space perhaps for the arts. Now, most educated people do without art. They're quite happy and they live a fulsome life. Much as I don't envy them for the fulsomeness of their life, but the fact remains that they can do without art. At best, they collect these horrid little pieces when their car stops and they discover a wooden Ganesh or some such thing being sold by those, and that's about all. Unless you consider that the calendars that they collect from the stores at the end of the year are also works of art that they have. That's about all. And this is what they are. But if you go to the more poor segments, at least in India, and the poorest of them are the tribals, you'll find that their life is more full of arts. They live much more beautifully, they weave beautifully, they carve beautifully, they dance and sing beautifully, and even though they live miles below the poverty line, they need beauty and they enjoy beauty. So when in Bharat Bhavan, for instance, we had some of these abstract paintings, let's say by Ambadas or Gaitonde, it was the educated who felt puzzled and dismissive, and the tribal and the ordinary people found it interesting. Now, in our country, however, there are rich people who patronize high art. You know, the Tatas and the Ambanis and such other luminaries whose names we are sick of hearing on the electronic media day in and day out. But it is they who buy, and it is they who auction, and it is they who have emerged as major patrons of high visual art, at least in our country. And there are other people who are satisfied in their artistic need, if any, by design, by various forms of entertainment and fashion, etc. But obviously, I'm not going to talk about these. These are happy people, and I leave them in their castles of happiness. I'm going to talk to those people who are somehow not satisfied with the given life. people who would like to think that there is another life possible. At least, if not altogether replacing their existing life, extending their given life. In other words, those who are looking for a life larger than given to them. But before we come to that, what kind of a world it is that in which we are talking about art this afternoon? Now, firstly, we are now living in a time in which every country is the neighbor of every other country. This had never happened before. You know, my mother, when she used to get exasperated by my impatience to get something or my unusual sense of hurry, he would say, "Tum bade Falkland se aa rahe ho." Now, I didn't know where Falkland was until I became a bad student of geography and discovered that Falkland was perhaps the farthest islands from India, to which my fifth class educated mother somehow knew. Her sense of distance, that you are coming as if you are coming from Falkland. But come to think of it, we know about now Mr. Arvind, my friend there, showed us a film which happened to have taken place a few days ago, an event in which a Venezuelan musician has created a wonderful social dimension to the classical music in Venezuela, and those slum dogs, as they are called, have risen to the highest sophistication of Western classical music. So we are living in a situation where every country is the neighbor of every other country. There is a lot of travel, a lot of exchange, a lot of there are common markets, and the MNCs who have world agendas. Actually, it is very interesting that politics and ideologies don't have world agendas. But the MNCs have world agendas, the markets have world agendas. Now, this also is an interesting phenomenon, how the world recedes from the world of ideas, if you like, and the world becomes an agenda for the trading people, for the industrial people, for this corporate sector. Now, styles and fashions and things and entertainment and sports travel faster across the world than they did ever before. In fact, even music, entertainment, cinema. I didn't want to use that word, but there is no other better word that I know. We are living in a time of the so-called globalization. And the globalization is not merely of markets and economy, it is also of crime. It is also globalization of fundamentalisms of various kinds. It is a globalization of violence. Actually, we seem to be living in historically the most violent era human history has ever known. United Nations report says that there are more than 100 civil wars taking place in the world today. That is the beginning of the 21st century. Some of them are in India as well. After all, as a society, India could be called to be a society in a permanent civil war, because we have never settled down. We keep on fighting this, that and the other. By the time we have fought this, something else emerges and we start fighting that. There is terrorism, of course, of one kind, which we all know. I'm not going to talk about it because everybody knows. But there are terrorisms of other kind. There's the terrorism of the market. There's a terrorism of sports. There's a terrorism of fashion, of entertainment. I live in a cooperative housing society flat, and one of my neighbors decided to enlighten me. You know, neighbors always want to enlighten you. That's one good thing about the neighbors. Apart from throwing rubbish into your courtyard, if you have one, they keep on thinking that you have to be updated. So this gentleman decided to update me, and one day he just said, "Have you seen this mall which has come up?" I said, I am not really interested in malls and things. I'm very poor at shopping. I can only shop books and music and nothing else. So there's no point in my going to that mall. But he took me there. There's a huge mall just created in Noida, and there must have been at that moment about 10,000 people there. Huge. And I imagined that out of these 9,980 were not going to buy anything in that mall. Not because they don't want to, because they cannot possibly afford to. And you can't possibly buy a shirt for 1,500 rupees. Of course, I mean, some of us can, but a normal person who earns, but they were all there to see this. Now, I think this is the terror of the market. There is a certain humiliation involved in making. In fact, we have come to live in a world which believes somehow that world cannot be changed by ideas. It can be changed by things, by objects. So long we have lived in the paradigm that the world is changed by ideas. But now world is being changed by objects, by things. The world is more armed today than ever before in human history. In fact, there are only three things which seem to travel without borders: crime, fundamentalisms, and armaments. They are not stopped by anybody. Obama has yesterday perhaps said that he's going to lead the disarmament in the nuclear area. Let us see what happens. He might be the last hope anyway, but you never know. Now, what are the implications of all these? I mean, these kinds of violences, this kind of armed universes, crime-ridden, crime-driven violence, etc., etc. One is that we are increasingly made to live in a tyranny of uniformity. You know, our ways of thinking, of talking, of reacting, our body language, etc. It's all increasingly becoming the same. There is a sameness to this world in spite of some color here and there. And whatever little color there is, it's only to provide a variety, a taste of the variety, not a celebration of the plurality that human beings have been used to. There is a tyranny of uniformity in style, in worldviews, in ideology. Actually, ideologies have disappeared. Ideas are being replaced, as I told you a while ago, by things. And values seem to have been relegated to a very minor position. Things have to be managed. So the politics is being managed, and of course management institutes are managing themselves, how I hope very well, and they are managing the markets, and they are managing the economy, and we in the government are managing bureaucracies. So everybody is managing. Nobody seems to be bothered about what kind of values are being either promoted or nurtured or suppressed or promoted by this massive global management. I think two great inventions of the human society were the individual and the society. The human society had these two categories: individuals and society. And now both of them are threatened. individuals don't seem to exist anymore. I mean, yes, there are individuals in the sense that they have names. My name is Ashok and somebody's name is Ram Sarup, but Ram Sarup and Ashok are more or less the same thing. They are no longer individuals having a particular viewpoint and a particular. We are not carbon copies, photocopies of each other. We dress like. There was a time when, I remember I lived in I'm a small town product, as you would have already guessed. I used to live in this place called Gopalganj in Sagar, a central Indian town, and we had 4 or 5 people as our neighbors. And in each house, if I go to Mr. Dave's house, there's a kind of a smell that is only, one can say, Dave house smell. And there was Bakshiji, so there was a Bakshiji house smell. And there must have been a Vajpayyi house smell, and there must have been we had one Khirvadkar or whatever his name was. So there was that kind of a smell. Now each house, in other words, each home has a distinctiveness. Now almost each flat or each house in colonies smells more or less the same thing. Everybody, I mean, if you go to the North India and if you're going to a marriage, you're bound to get matar paneer and you're bound to get chole and things of that kind. So there's a fixed menu which everybody is following. Everything is decided actually by others. It's very little that we decide ourselves. Again, to go back to my little housing society, we are being led into a situation in which we are afraid of being left lonely. We are unlearning the art or the skill of being lonely. Now, how does this happen? I have again my front door neighbor. He seems to be alone in the sense that he lives all by himself. Now, how do I know that he has come into his house? Not by the turn of the key, which I don't hear, but the moment he enters his house, he puts the television on. And since it is his neighborly duty to also make the front door neighbor feel a little less lonely, he puts it on at a volume which is also makes it audible to me. Now, here is a man who enters his house after days' work, and he doesn't want to be alone even for a minute, even for a moment, because he can't. Our loneliness has been taken away from us, in a manner of speaking, by all these forces which have emerged. And mind you, it's only the lonely who have been creative. It is only the lonely who have dared to think of changing the world. It is only the lonely who have dreamt that other worlds are possible. But that kind of a loneliness is being increasingly denied to us. You would remember that Mahatma Gandhi used to have 1 day Maun Vrat every week. Now that was his way of being lonely, because he was not. Here's a man who is waging an epic battle against the British Empire, and he would like to be lonely once in a week, to be quiet once in a week. We are the most noisy earth today. The earth has never been so noisy as now. And there is a new erotics of talking which has developed. I call it Samvad Rati. People have these mobiles and they are talking, and in Hindi there's a phrase which can only be said in Hindi, कि बोले तो बहुत पर कहा क्या? So we keep on speaking without really saying anything of substance. But they are so, इसमें जीरा डालना है कि नहीं डालना, इसमें फलाना, मैं पहुंच रहा हूँ 3 मिनट में, गाड़ी कहाँ है, तुम राम रतन आया कि नहीं, all these kinds of trivia, and the earth's noise levels are being raised by this. There is no dialogue, there is only talking. And this is a strange Samvad Rati in which there is no Samvad. I hope there is no Rati either. But anyway, that's how it is. Now, I mean, let us take in the world of art. I have a friend who lives in Paris who's a great painter, Syed Haider Raza. He's one of those highly priced artists. He comes either to Bombay or to Delhi, and the media comes, and the first thing they ask him, Mr. Raza, your such and such painting was recently sold at this auction for 4.5 crores. And he gets extremely irritated. He said, you come to talk to price? You don't think there is any value to that painting? Why don't you say how was the painting, whether it's good or bad, what was it all about? You don't know interest. You only want to know what is the price and how do I feel about it. I feel terribly disappointed that my paintings are priced but they are not valued. So there is a dichotomy, a hiatus which has taken place in our time between price and value. So everything is being judged by the price and not by the value. In fact, if you look at these, I mean, you know, we are in the election. Whether this is a dance of democracy or a taণ্ডava of democracy, I do not know, but that's what one newspaper calls it. And all kinds of manifestos are being issued. And if you study these manifestos, they're very interesting. They're not saying anything, what are they going to do to the Indian society? They're only saying what they're going to do to the Indian market. Someone says, we will make everything available, single window. The other one says, no, why window? I'll open the door. And the third one says, no, you should come and sit in the courtyard, have a glass of wine or whatever. And somebody says, no, why should you be in the courtyard? We have a bedroom which is rather nicely done. So all concessions are being offered to the market. And the trickle effect, you know, I mean, we are being told again and again, there will be a trickle effect that ultimately one day some boon will come down, and we, the thirsty, we who are living in the dark layers, will one day get this single drop which is going to trickle down. Luckily, the late capitalism's bubble has just now exploded. And therefore, a need for regulation and perhaps a rehabilitation of the nation state is going to take place. Otherwise, the nation state itself had come into jeopardy. There was tremendous pressure on national governments that they should allow free movement of goods and capital, not free movement of labor. So their visa regimes have become more and more stringent, more and more restrictive, and they want that the concessions should be given more and more, and relaxation should be given more and more for the capital and the goods to flow. Therefore, this is a new geography of exclusion which is being created. Exclude. हमारे एक मित्र थे, वो एक ज़माने में कहते थे कि गरीबी हटाओ, और नारा था एक दल का, तो वो कहते थे भाई कहाँ ले जाएं? तो सामने से तो हटाओ. You know, at least you remove it from the main area. Where you take it, hide it somewhere. Now this seems to be happening in this country anyway. We are being, luckily one party lost on that, although the other parties don't seem to have learnt many lessons from that. But otherwise there was a shining India. And the shining India, and there was a much larger, dark India. And finally one hoped, and I still hope, that one day the dark India would devour the shining India. But I don't know whether it will happen in my lifetime or no, but anyway. We have lived in the human history throughout by a plurality of ideas. It was said about India, it's very interesting that India once got this tribute, that in India no idea is allowed to dominate. The moment a new idea emerges, a counter idea is also encouraged to emerge. This is what the Indologist once said about India. But now there is no plurality of ideas and views. There is only plurality of objects, of things, of styles and such like. One can argue that there are ideas in them also, but that's another matter. Now, where does art come in this such a complex world, confused and enormously confusing? Let me try to now defend my love. One, what does art do? I think very simply, it depicts and narrates. It tells you stories. And it tells you stories which are not being told by others. Ezra Pound once said, poetry is news that stays news, unlike other news, which wither away the next day. So, a simple thing that art does, it describes, depicts, and narrates. It celebrates. It celebrates the fact of being. I'm very fond of saying that all arts, including literature, are basically sansar ka gungan. The rejoicing in the fact that this is a world, rejoice in the fact that this is a world that we have created. Third, that this is the world that we can change, that this is the world in which we are born and live and going to die. So let us celebrate this world with all its adversities, imperfections, inadequacies, this, that, and the other. But basically, the world must be rejoiced. Gods don't create art, luckily. It is given to humans to create art, because art is created by those who are imperfect. You would remember that Gandhiji once said this about religions. He said, somebody asked him, what about this, so many religions? He said, all religions are true, but they are all imperfect. So he created a kind of a democratic space for all religions to, in a manner of speaking, exist, because all of them were true but imperfect. Art is born out of this basic notion that we are all true, and not only we human beings, the trees and the birds and the sky and the cosmos, everything is true and everything is imperfect. Art is an affirmation, if you like, of this notion, an affirmation in many, many different colors and hues and languages. Then art explores. It tells you something which you have not thought of. Go to any work of art, go to any sort of... once Madhu Limaye wrote a letter to Kumar Gandharv, who was in jail, I mean not Kumar Gandharv, Madhu Limaye, during emergency. And in that letter, Madhu Limaye seemed to have said that your music makes me feel as if I am about to touch the mystery of the universe. Now, this notion that there is a mystery and that one can touch it once in a while, is the notion which makes a very humanizing function. Imagine Madhulime in some dark jail, and at that time, when you are in jail, you don't think, when are you going to be released and all that, and there to think that you can touch through music by listening to music. This is not creating music, just listening to music, touch the mystery. We seem to live in an age where two human faculties, mystery and wonder, seem to have been suppressed, if not killed altogether. Science, and I sort of shudder to say this in an institute of science, so I say in great humility and out of my deep ignorance, that science seemed to have created a notion that there is no mystery in the world which cannot be solved. It's a matter of time, because our instrumentation, our theories, our means of exploration are inadequate, but sooner or later we shall discover the mystery, and therefore there is nothing to wonder about. Now I think art does exactly the opposite. It keeps on telling you that the world, whether human or non-human, is an abiding mystery, and that it can never be fully understood and never be fully resolved, and that therefore we should wonder at what this mystery is all about. But art also interrogates. It interrogates the given moralities, the given social structures, the given cultural modes, whatever is the given is interrogated. And sometimes these interrogations can land you in entirely something, in something which is entirely opposite to what you started doing. The very famous example is John Milton's great epic, Paradise Lost. The poet in the body of the poem says, to justify ways of God to men. He is writing this epic to justify ways of God to men. But what he lands up? Justifying ways of Satan to God. So Satan emerges in Paradise Lost as a more powerful character than poor God. And here is something which only art can do. We had a long tradition until some of our more zealous friends have started questioning it, at least in India, of making fun of gods. Our gods, whether the God created man his own image or not, as the Christians believe, at least the Hindus for a long time believe that we created God in our own image. So we have all kinds of gods, and if you look at the number of gods, it's supposed to be 330 million, and surely our human population would have been less than that. So we had a divine population which was far in excess of our human population. And you pick up a god, and if he doesn't serve the purpose, it doesn't get you a promotion or doesn't get you endeared to the person you want endeared to, etc., then throw it into the backyard to get another one issued from God. And the bhakti poets have made fun of God in so many different ways. So here is an interrogation of religion. Imagine Kabir in the 16th century in the Vatican city of Hinduism, Banaras, saying what? Pade tum nipun kasai. One of my ancestors, some Brahmin, telling him, Ki Pandey ji, you are a very competent butcher. And then he describes what you butcher. And that's not butchering the cow, butchering the goat or something. It is butchering human beings themselves. And then he also says, चीटी के पग नेवर बाजे, सो तेरा साहिब सुनता है. ऊंची चढ़ के बांग लगाए, क्या तेरा साहिब बहरा है? This is addressed to Muslims. Now, here is a poet who is questioning the priesthood, the karma kand, the this, that and the other. Ultimately, सब कहते थे कि बनारस में आके मरो तो स्वर्ग मिलेगा. You know, a whole lot of people keep on, if they don't die there, at least they get cremated there, many of them. And that's how the Shashwamedh and Manikarnika Ghat are nothing but pious and pious of burning all the time. But he, having lived in Banaras, decided to return to Maghar, which was his village. और उसने कहा कि अगर, मुझे दोहा ठीक से याद नहीं आ रहा, कि अगर बनारस में मरने से मोक्ष मिलता है तो इसमें फिर ईश्वर का क्या श्रेय. मैं तो मगहर में जाके मरूंगा, अगर मुझे ईश्वर वहां से भेजेगा, मोक्ष दिलवाएगा, तब उसकी बात मानूंगा कि हाँ तू ईश्वर है, वरना बनारस में मरने से तो मिल ही जाता है. Now this is interrogation of a, take Anna Karenina, Tolstoy, a great classic. What is Anna Karenina doing? Anna Karenina is about a woman who's married and who dares to fall in love with someone other than her husband. An absolutely immoral act. But before you decide or judge from whatever standards that she is doing something immoral and unpardonable, Tolstoy is telling you, your how did Yeats say, the foul rag and bone shop of the heart, he looks into that and brings it in the open. So art makes you face what you are, what you could be, what you haven't been. All this it brings forth. In other words, what is invisible either in you or in others appears, becomes a presence. Art also remembers and reminds you. Each one of us thinks that we are the first in the world, that before us nothing happened. I am the first person who's doing this. So this is this arrogance that you are the first one and you are the... And look at the way it does it. It remembers and it reminds you. It reminds you of many things. Like I want to remind you just now because I remember it. Now, I already told you that I am a poet, so I am going to meander around and do whatever I like, and unfortunately you are my victims for this afternoon, so you have to bear with me. This is a very interesting story of Gandhiji on his Dandi March. Happened about 78 years ago. He reaches a village which is 70 odd satyagrahis, and it is dark. It's evening already, and there's a river to be crossed to go on to the other side. The river is muddy, so it cannot be walked through. It is shallow, so it cannot be navigated. So it is decided that the party shall rest for a while, and about midnight, when some water will come in the river, they will be allowed to, in a boat, to cross on to the other side. Gandhiji, being an extremely punctual man like British, he went off to sleep. And these villagers started wondering, how would they allow Gandhiji and these 70 odd satyagrahis in the pitch dark night to go in a boat? Even if there is river enough for the boat to be rowed through. So they started wondering there should be some light. And that gives me the most moving metaphor I have ever got in my life. These illiterate, poor villagers decided to hold earthen lamps in their hands. So when Gandhiji came out at 12 o'clock, midnight, he saw there were hundreds of villagers standing on the bank of the river with earthen lamps in their hands. And the word has gone across the river to the other village where he was to go. They were also standing. Now this happened in this country only 77 years ago. It looks like an episode from the Bible, from some ancient tale. But this is what art does. When it can do nothing to stop people from crossing. It cannot advise them to don't cross it. But there are some who dare, because they have more urgent call of duty to perform, and therefore they have to cross. Then art stands like this earthen lamp to show some light to those who are going to dare to cross a river in the pitch dark of the night. Ladies and gentlemen, this is one of the essential functions. Boris Pasternak, during the Soviet regime, which he found, as you know, was very cruel, very repressive, he wrote a poem. He says, "Howsoever cold and dark be the night, at least one candle must keep on burning." It's a poem about how dark and cold and deep the night is. But the hope that one candle can still be burning ablaze. Now, we the other day, I'm reading a book called The Concise Book of Lying. It's a very interesting book, and it starts as a quotation from the Mahabharata. And I was therefore surprised that neither lying nor speaking truth is a particularly modern phenomena. That even 3,000 years ago, when Vyas was writing Mahabharata, he was faced this. And if you remember, some of the great characters in Mahabharata speak lies, or at least half-truth. The famous Ashwatthama's killing and all that, Narova, Kunjarova, etc. So you all know that. So art also reminds you that, in fact, in art, nothing is past. Art creates the only possible simultaneous eternity given to man. Wow. Nothing is past. So why do you read Mahabharata? Why do you read Kalidas? Why do you read Kabir? They're all people who sort of thousands of years ago, hundreds of years ago, because art creates that eternity where nothing is past. Everything of significance, of depth, of courage, of imagination continues to live in that eternity. And it also stops you from dividing the world into black and white. That's the job of the priest, that's the job of the judge, that's the job of the commissar, and there are enough of them who decide that this is black and this is white. Art exists in that middle area, which is neither black nor white. Therefore, if you look at some of the heroes in the last 100 years of Indian novels, for instance, you will find that they are people who are utterly nondescript, non-heroic. They do not come from a historical background, they don't come from a large family, they don't come from, any of those trappings that are given to nobility. They are ordinary, simple human beings, and in being human, and in failing as human beings, they affirm not only their humanity, they affirm our humanity. This is the one lesson that all 20th century literature can teach you. James Joyce famously said, "I go into the smithy of my soul to forge the uncreated conscience of my age." Ladies and gentlemen, I suggest to you that art is the last rampart of human conscience in our time. And by art, I do not mean a single art. I mean every form of creativity. Kenneth Rexroth, which is a great American critic, I must speak these names so that you are suitably impressed that I am not such ill-educated as I appear to be. So I keep on remembering these names and throwing on you. Kenneth Rexroth said famously that against all the destruction of the world, there is only one defense: the creative act. So this faith, this rehabilitation, both of conscience, I don't think Bush and such like would have a conscience. We are living in a time which is the time of the Digvijay of Jhoot. Imagine what happened in Iraq. Two of the greatest powers kept on telling a lie that there is these weapons of mass destruction this fellow had. What was his name? Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein might have been a very cruel person. Saddam Hussein must have deserved to be condemned and all that. But that was something to be done by Iraqi people. But both United States and Britain kept on speaking a lie. This is not, I don't think there has ever been a time Hitler did not speak a lie. He hated the Jews and he put them to death. This was not, at least, his truth was highly inhuman and this, that and the other, and totally indefensible. But he did not speak a lie. Stalin did what he did, the massacres that he did, at least in the name of some great values. Equality and freedom, what you have. But look at these gentlemen of our time. The 21st century has started with a triumph of untruth, in fact, triumph of lies, a global triumph of lies. And these lies are not merely confined to these Bush and what is his name, Blair. There are any number of them around us who keep on speaking these lies the every day. Against this global global tyranny of the lie, somewhat like these little earthen lamps on that bank of the river, art tells you some truths, simple truths. And one of them is that in spite of everything, in spite of all the problems and forces pitched against humanity, it is still possible to be human. One. Two, like I think Margos Losa said it, that art reminds us that the world as it has been given to us is a badly made world, and that we can change it. Nobody else is responsible for this world to be what it is except us. Also, a lot of violence in the world today is because we are not able to accept them, whoever they are. The problem is between us and them, between we and they. One of the revolutionary functions of art has been throughout the ages to completely demolish this dichotomy, to tell you actually we are they and them are us, that there is really no difference. If you read Yehuda Amichai, an Israeli Jewish poet, and if you read Mahmoud Darwish, who recently died, both of them on the opposite sides. One was a Philistine and the other one was a Jew. And they are writing from their own historical pain and experience and suffering. But both are affirming the fact that we can be human in spite of this violence, in spite of all this which is happening, these wars, and that we are them and they are us. This is one big moral lesson which has great political implications if you go into details. Now we all live in our time, but we all have a notion that there is a time beyond time, that there is something timeless. There is something which time does not fully cover or explain. This is nothing new. This has been throughout the centuries. Man alone Homo sapiens alone perhaps, have a sense of the timeless. I don't think squirrels and birds will have a sense of the timeless. I don't know, even they have a sense of time, but they might have some sense of duration and all that. But if you combine in art, in literature, you are made to be in your own time and made to touch or move out to or reach out towards the timeless. So when you're hearing Rag Malkauns, for instance, to take an obvious example, Rag Malkauns has been sung by hundreds of musicians for 400 years, this, that and the other. And yet, when you hear it, you have a notion that if Satyashil Deshpande or Pushkar Lele or my friend Uday Bhavalkar, if they are singing Malkauns today, they are doing both. They are singing in time and they are singing in timelessness, because Malkauns has survived many musicians, many gharanas, many generations. So there is this notion of the timeless built in. Only if it is given to the Homo sapiens. You cannot reach the timeless without being in time. So you cannot withdraw yourself. Arts are not about withdrawing into the Himalayan caves. There is no aranya, somewhere a safe sort of holiday home, somewhere in the Himalayas, beautifully manicured, kept for you to go there and touch the timeless. Art is very much a matter of here and now. Kabira khada bazaar mein, liye lukathi haath. Kabir was not saying this by sitting near Vishwanath Mandir. He was saying it in bazaar mein, Kabira khada bazaar mein. So this is the mud and the blood and all the dust and what you have. In that, to make you touch the timeless. In that, to make you rise from your time. So you cannot be touching the timeless without being in your time fully. It is not an escape from time, it is an intensification of time. Now, another thing which at least in the last 300-400 years has happened in the arts and literature. Earlier on, notions of nobility, notions of courage, notions of a spiritual glow were very elitist, exclusive notions. They were given to people who were either very well endowed or to Brahmins who were supposed to be very well read, wise people, or to what literature and arts have done in the last 200-300 years is to democratize this space of spirituality. In fact, again to go back to Kabir, he says, इस अंतर्घट इस घट भीतर बाग बगीचे इसी में सृजन हारा. Where are you? Why are you planning to go here and there and this, that and the other? It is in you. You don't have to go anywhere else. I think this spiritual glow of the ordinary, of the utterly ordinary, of the poor, of the deprived, of the sidelined, all this has received a voice. more importantly and more primarily in literature and arts than in actual polity, in actual society. So you have, for instance, during the Bhakti period, you have Namdev was a tailor, wasn't he?
Yeah.
And Kabir was a weaver, and Raidas was a cobbler. These people, and they are all acknowledged to be important major poets. So there is a democracy. In other words, a true democracy. Actually, literature and arts are the only democracy given to man. All other democracies approximate to the notion of. But this democracy, like that eternity that we first created, here is another notion of democracy. Here, the king and the cobbler, the noble and the ignoble, God and Satan, and gods and dafangas, and hoodlums, they are all equal. They are all allowed to live in this world created by human imagination. Oh, I don't know how much time I have. I can.
Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. Because these words are these days very common. Look at the state of religions in our time. All religions have become violent and aggressive. Now they have become violent, aggressive, intolerant of not only other religions, they have become intolerant of their own plurality. I am very fond of saying, for instance, that RSS is not a threat to Islam. It is a greater threat to Hinduism. Because it is going to destroy the plurality of Hinduism rather than destroy the whatever. But look at all these religions, and we have arrived at a situation when most religions have abandoned their inherent spirituality. And by the spiritual I mean the normal human desire to connect with the larger reality. To think that if there are tears in my eyes, there is a star somewhere who is weeping. Now this kind of a notion, that cosmos is not something which exists and which can only be seen through various things that you see them through, but cosmos is something which exists in you. Again Kabir said, Teri kaya mein gulzar. In your body exists the garden. Why are you looking for the garden outside? Now this whole notion of spirituality, now spirituality's last residence in the human society, at least for the time being, is in the realm of arts and literature. It is there, or perhaps in science, where the notion of the cosmic and the utterly local can be connected without any problem, and where you can resonate the cosmos in yourself. So there is a politics of connectivity and inclusion as against the politics of exclusion, which is dominant. There is an economy of values rather than prices, and towards a religion of spiritual togetherness and camaraderie. In the Republic of Art, all are equal. Gods, angels, devils, animals, objects, human beings. Art relieves you from the confines of the human world. To think that you alone matter, that the world is too much with us, you remember that line, and that there are other things. Once I was delivering a convocation address at the one has to do things as a bureaucrat without much notice, because the gentleman who was supposed to deliver the convocation address fell ill, and I was holding the charge. So they said, well, please come, this is a convocation address, you have to do it. So I did it, and I said the following. I said, when you are looking at a 10th century statue, you forget that the 10th century statue is also looking at you. And that it has been there already for 10 centuries. Whereas you are there only for 25 years, or 30 years, or like me, 68 years. So rest in brief authority. You should not look at these things with a degree of, but you should do it with a sense of humility. Objects also have a life which is different from human life, but they have a life, and it is different from the objects we keep on gathering in our homes. Again, I'm reminded of if you go to a normal middle class house, you have 4 or 5 dinner what are they called? Dinner sets. There. Now one dinner set is being used, or perhaps 2 are being used, but the rest are all there. So once I was invited to a very nice people, very civilized. They had 4 mixies. So I thought that the people who collect Ganeshas or Lakshmis, so they might have thought that these are the new symbols. So I asked the lady that, are you fond of collecting mixies? He said, no. The other day we had gone to so-and-so, and we found that there was a new mixie which was much more efficient. So I bought that, and there were others already. Now, this is how, I'm not talking of those things, but purely utilitarian materials and things of that kind. But art is also a repository of memory. In fact, arts and literature together constitute the most wonderful, wall-less, borderless museum of human imagination. Wow. What man has imagined. You don't have to take a visa or don't have to buy a ticket. Of course, you have to buy a book. But if you're at Delhi, you can see even plays and music recitals all free. Delhi बहुत ही मुफ्तखोरों का शहर है. But anyway, that apart, the fact that there is this museum, which is amazing, and what would connect with what, you would never know, because there might be, after all, there was an African mask which once inspired Pablo Picasso, who happened to see it in Musée de Guimet by sheer accident. But that changed his entire, a phase of his painting. And why is it important to have such a museum? It is important because we are being engulfed in a massive global amnesia. You will only remember what you are told to remember. And there are many who are telling you this. The electronic channels are telling you, and this, that, and the other telling you. And there is nothing to remind you that there is more to human imagination than is being shown. Now I come to the last part, brief one. I hope brief. I don't know. हमारी हालत तो ये सत्यशील देशपांडे जैसे लोगों की है. अगर आपके चेहरे पे थोड़ी मुस्कुराहट दिखती है तो हम बढ़त करने लगते हैं. अगर आप थोड़े गुमसुम बैठे तो हमारा दिल डूब जाए, हम खत्म करेंगे, भाई चलो हो गया. Now, at one level, art is that area of truth speaking, if you like, where art speaks the truth and doubts it. I am saying this which is true. Maybe. This appears to me to be true, but maybe it is not. I'll take you to the Nasidi Sukt, where it says this, that, and the other. It says when there was no being, no non-being, no presence, no absence, no light, no darkness, what was there? Who knows? And then the Rishi adds, maybe he who has created all this knows. The Creator knows. That's all right. But then, and this is where poetry enters, maybe even he doesn't know. And of course, Amartya Sen in his book traces the origins of Indian skepticism from the Nasadi Sukt itself. But in the sense, this notion of doubting the truth that you are uttering with great passionate intensity. 2. In spite of the glare, and in spite of all the noises and what you have, art is a lonelier activity in our time than ever before. It's an activity of lonely courage, because you are increasingly being devoured by these, and therefore one must give the credit to art to dare to be lonelier in these rather crowded times. And the third thing is, it reveals to us our complicity, our moral responsibility. Art does not allow you to let go with a feeling that the world is so bad because others have done it. The art makes you feel that the world is bad, is really truly bad. It is bad because of us, you and I both included, in the act of making this world bad. So art creates a sense of moral responsibility. I had a friend who died. He wrote a line, कोई नहीं है जिम्मेदार, जिम्मेदारी है अपनी ही. कोई और नहीं है जिम्मेदार. It is we who are responsible. Art also liberates you from trivialities. फलाना पेंशन नहीं आई, चिट्ठी नहीं मिली, बॉस आज मुस्कुराए नहीं, all kinds of these, पड़ोसी जो था वो आज बहुत ही देर तक खांसता रहा, etc. We should normally gladden your heart that he is in some bad way. But, these kinds of trivialities which occupy so much of our time and attention, it liberates you from them. But the God of art resides in details. It does not reside in these great truths. So Mahabharata resides in its details. It's a wonderful stories of all kinds of elopement and violence and rape and what you have, duplicity, God being so such a doubtful character, etc., etc. These details, they create the humanity of the arts, not the overall ideological or truth-like structure. Ultimately, we have all been given one life, good, bad, indifferent, whatever it is. And art allows you other lives. So when you are reading a novel, you become that other, a world totally unknown to you, maybe, or very known to you and yet not understood by you. So it gives you the advantage of having within one single life many other lives. Now this is a very humanizing advantage. This is a very humanizing aspect of art. You see, in the end, let's put it this way. Art is a uniquely human activity. You see, animals eat, they copulate, they quarrel, they run, they walk, they live, they die. There's nothing very human beings also do the same thing. It's only in the arts and sciences which is a uniquely human activity. In other words, other beings don't create and enjoy art, but Homo sapiens do. They create and they enjoy their creation. Now, in order to realize your full humanness, your being richly human, you must turn to art. If not create it yourself, at least enjoy it. It cannot be said, after all, there are all kinds of contradictions involved. The Nazi generals were great admirers of Western classical music, but that did not prevent them from making lampshades out of human skin. So this has also happened. So art is not a very sacred activity. It's a very profane activity. Oscar Wilde said famously, all of us are in the gutters, but some of us are gazing at the stars. Perhaps you are gazing at the stars anyway, but you keep on gazing them all too often. I know I am in the gutters, and once in a while, when I write a poem, or when I listen to a piece of music of Mallikarjun Mansoor or somebody, and when I am looking at a painting, I know that I am looking although I am gutters, at the stars. And that makes me, hopefully, more human than I was before that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful. So, and comments are
Well, you seem to have presented a very different picture of modern world. I suppose you don't mean it in some sense. In the sense which I understood. You were talking about, I just narrate my experience. In Bombay, Chapati, escalator product. Look at people who are religious and look at the shine in the eyes when they jump.